Well, welcome everyone to the podcast video cast of the day. Today we have a special treat in William J. O'Malley, who was one of the early employees of the LA Olympic Organizing Committee and was one of the key people in putting those games on. He was basically in charge of all the technology. And what's most interesting about Bill's background is while his family grew up attending the games, he actually applied to be an employee of the LA Olympic Organizing Committee very early on after a career in the telephone business. And what William and I will be talking about is how the technology that was used during these games as provided by the various sponsors of the games is actually now part of our daily life 40 years later. So Bill, the floor is yours.
Well, Chris, it's great to see you again, and we had a lot of fun working together on the games. And I'll have to
Yes,
start with a.
We're wearing matching ties.
We are.
We both have the same uniform. But see, Bill still has a hat.
This comes with a hat with the pink bow.
See, I have none of that except the tie left.
This is great for reunions and Halloween parties. I've gone as Peter Uberoth. It's served me well over 40 years. But
it still fits you, which is impressive.
It does. But I wanted to start by giving a shout out to a mutual friend who I think is also participating in the podcast, Rich Perlman. And Rich he was my biggest customer. I was involved with the results system for the games primarily, and so he was my biggest customer. His customer being the press. But Rich also wrote the final report for the games, and he a 2-volume, 35 pounds, because I had to ship it somewhere once, so I know what it weighs. The volume 1 is 888 pages long, and the first line of the final report was, "There was so much that was so good, believe me." And that wasn't his line. That's my bad impersonation. But the games were really a miracle. And if you haven't seen it, this morning the Washington Post published an article titled "The Miracle of 1984: How Los Angeles Saved the Dying Olympic Movement."
And for those of you listening, today's date is July 22, 2024.
So that's hold up the paper. But
make sure you're alive today.
right. And in 1984, there were about 4 billion people in the world, 4,775,000,000. Today, there are 8,028,000,000. So we've essentially doubled in the years. But like 1893 in Chicago and the 1964-65 World's Fair in New York, Los Angeles introduced some groundbreaking technology that Chris alluded to that literally was either not being widely adopted or was brand new. And that technology went on to literally change the world.
And we're still using that today. Much of it.
Right down to the phone in your pocket. And I was able to come up with, and in fact, we had 23 sports in 1984, and the technology was so impactful that AT&T, who was one of the technology sponsors, literally put it on a bumper sticker, and it was technology that it was called the 24th event because there was so much happening. And that technology included, for example, personal computers, and we're talking, dual diskette, where you load MS-DOS into one drive and
oh my goodness,
multi-plan, or I'm afraid so, into the other drive, and if anyone remembers the Macintosh commercial, the Super Bowl ad, the 1984 Super Bowl ad when the Mac was introduced. So that same year, the Mac came on the scene as well as PCs, cellular telephones, email, voicemail, fax machines, digital pagers that could accept text messages. That was the dawn of text messaging. Laser printers and high-speed copiers, fiber optic cables, Unix operating system, digital telephone central offices and PBXs, and spectrum efficient, again, analog in those days, but still spectrum efficient trunked two-way radios were what really gave us this foundation. And that technology was, again, not being used extensively, but after the games and for a period of the next 5 to 10 years after that, literally exploded into
how did the
our
games
world.
get that? How did the games get this technology?
It was primarily a group of sponsors and suppliers who provided really the groundbreaking stuff. And that was AT&T, which included Pacific Telephone and Telegraph, which was the local Bell operating company. AT&T, by the way, another momentous 84 event was that they went through the breakup of the Bell system. On January 1st, 1984, the Justice Department broke the Bell system up, the big monopoly. And so the phone guys kept coming in with new business cards because they kept changing the names of the companies. And so and they changed the logos on the phones, and were repainting new pins. They all had new pins as the breakup occurred, as it unwound over that last year. But Xerox, with their high-speed copiers, laser printers, and fax machines, they were called telecopiers. Motorola with their two-way radios, and of course, cell telephones that were all brand new. IBM had the audio distribution system, which was the voicemail technology of the day. They also provided the PCs. They had mini computer systems, System 38s. We had twin, I think it was 4381 computers, mainframe computers at the ticketing center, and also ran the results system.
And so were the sponsors willing to provide, did they provide this at little or no cost to the organization?
Well, that you'll need to read the article on how the sponsorship arrangements were unique to 84. They paid for membership in a very small club. There were a handful of sponsors and suppliers. I'm not remembering. It was like 25 or 30. And so it was a very exclusive club. The buy-in was very high. And then they provided the equipment on an in-kind basis. So that was a part of the sponsorship agreement. So Xerox provided, I think it was 452 copiers. And we proceeded to print.
What did you used to call those copiers that would copy? And what was amazing about them, and I haven't really seen them since, was it would actually copy tabs. So if you had a tabbed notebook of 50 different exhibits, it would actually copy the tabs. And I've really never seen that since.
Yeah, I think that was a Xerox 9500, and it was as big as a Buick, and and required at the Coliseum, we had to put up a water tower to provide for the cooling, for the air conditioning, because we had so many of them in one space. And we blew through 54 million copies. I have a picture of myself at a warehouse where Xerox assembled all the paper and all of the equipment, and they put the paper up in such a way so you could take selfies in front of it before selfies were a thing in front of. And I think it was a 60 boxcar train of equipment and paper that came into Los Angeles as they got ready for this. So again, the equipment came from the sponsors. Again, like a World's Fair, where Tesla was showing off AC power in Chicago at the World's Fair. A lot of this stuff was either brand new or incredible improvements on prior technology. For example, the fax machines that we used, the prior equipment would take 6 minutes per page.
For those of you who are really young, it was a drum that would circle.
It was a drum, yes,
by Exxon,
yes.
I think.
And a head would go across and pick up the image. the units that we used were what they called Group 3 fax machines, and they were sub 1 minute in most cases. So, and that was that then broke the dam. Then everybody had to have a fax machine.
Right.
And the Group 1 machines that you were referring to, they cost $24,000.
Wow. That was the price of a car in those days.
And you had to use and you had to have an operator. You had to put a handset. It had rubber cups and that kind of thing. So, the personal computers, for example, IBM provided us with 250 of them, and for an organization with thousands of people, we had 250. They were on rolling carts, and the cart had a printer underneath it with a dot matrix tractor feed printer. And if you wanted to update your multi-plan spreadsheet, you would look around the office, see who had the computer, and then you'd wander over to their desk and then stand there, going back and forth saying, when are you going to be done? And when they were finished, you'd take the computer, roll it back over to your desk and put in your disks and do your thing. And then somebody would be standing outside your cube waiting for you, and they'd roll it away. So there was no networks. There was, again, it was 250 machines, and most of them were for administrative. They did have a number of them dedicated to things like the badging system. So they developed some special programs that were used for those. The cell phones, the original phones that were installed, went into the trunk of the car. They were as big as a big hardcover book, and they were wired to the transmission, wired to the battery, and there was a handset on the transmission hump, and there was a curly Q antenna on the roof, and there were 3-watt units, so pretty powerful. We had 12 cell sites that were put up to support a 4,500 square mile area.
Oh my goodness.
There are now hundreds of thousands of cell sites, large and mini, to serve the same population. And then right before the games, they came out with the Motorola Brick. So this was the original ones were bolted into the car, but then these came out at the last minute. We got 20 of these, 20 of them, and they had a battery that lasted for 30 minutes, and it took 8 hours to charge it. So it was almost why bother. But when the games were over, I was so hooked on this technology. I went out and bought this, spent $3,000.
Oh my goodness.
On this phone. And every time you'd hit the send button, it was 50 cents a minute, all day, every day, no evenings and weekends, no friends and family.
Amazing.
So, yeah. And the next thing that we were looking at was text messaging and digital pagers. And so again, Motorola provided us with Optrix pagers, and these, you clipped them on your belt, and 40 character display. And again, after the games were over, we had, there were 2,000 of these in use, and they were tied to the email system, so you could send text messages essentially. And they sent literally millions of messages to these things. And again, when the games were over, I went out to a vendor, Ultra Telecom, and I signed up and bought myself one. Couldn't live without it.
So the email was tied to the text messages, so you could send an email. If you sent an email, or what did we call it in those days? Electronic mail? What was it? What was the term?
The system that AT&T put in was called the EMS, the Electronic Messaging System, and it provided email. It provided access to the results. It provided start lists, all of that information. It had athlete bios. If you were appropriately credentialed, you could send and receive telex messages on it. And again, email back and forth. There were 100,000 users on the system, and they sent over the period of the games and then during the trial periods ahead of time, 3 million messages. But you could go in to a person, and if they had a digital pager, you could actually send them a 40-character text message. But again, this system, these were all standalone terminals that were strategically placed around. Nobody had anything on their desk. This was you would walk up to the terminal, sit down, log in. compose your message. There was a printer nearby, and that would be how you would send and receive email. And that system was run on another one of the major players in terms of technology. That was run on software called Unix, which nowadays you hear the term Linux and its derivatives. It's great and great grandchildren. But Unix was developed by AT&T Bell Laboratories to run their big telephone switches, and it's robust and it's secure and it's very stable. And so the 3B20 computers that our email system ran on, there were 14 computers that ran in a cluster, that all ran on Unix. And again, that was your iPhone today runs on Unix. Mac OS is all Unix derivative software. So, and it's what powers the modern internet. And so, but that was one of the first early uses of that technology. Voicemail was IBM provided voicemail, and that was interesting in that it wasn't tied to the phone system. Everybody had answering machines in the 70s and 80s, but voicemail was essentially voice email. You would literally go up to a kiosk and there was a phone, and you had your welcome kit. So you would dial in and access your mailbox and put in your password. And then you had a directory of all of the users, and you would punch in their number, record a message, send it, and hang up. And then hoping that they, at some point when they had a free moment, would go in, access their system, listen to your message, reply to it, and back and forth. But it wasn't tied, there was no message waiting lights, wasn't tied to the telephone systems until many years later, when the big phone switches started bolting this voice email onto it. And we had 16,000 users during the games who actually wanted to try it and play with it. And they sent 108,000 minutes of messages over a 2-week period. And so, so we were talking about the fax machines, the pagers, laser printers, also a piece of technology that was pretty much unheard of at that point, high-speed copiers. But the laser printers we used on the results system, and we used those to produce very high quality, we could put fonts, specialized fonts, we could do the pictograms. And so those became the masters that we would then make these tens of millions of copies and hand them out to the press. So, and those were provided by Xerox. Another new technology that was strung all over Southern California was fiber optic cables. And of course, everything's now fiber optic. But between General Telephone and Electronics, which was there were 2 telephone companies in the LA basin. Pacific Telephone, which was an AT&T subsidiary, and GTE, which was an independent series of phone companies. And I think GTE had 6 venues and AT&T had the rest, Pacific Bell. But they strung 300 miles of fiber under the streets of Los Angeles to connect up portable central offices that they had built into big semi-trailers that they dragged out to the sites. Wow. So that all of the phone needs on site, and those all got hooked up with fiber optics. ABC used the super clear fiber to transmit much of their all of their television signals from the venues back to the broadcast center, and then feed over to the International Broadcast Center. And so the quality was super high because, again, you're not dealing in an analog setting with that. Let's see. One of the other things we touched on was there were 4,000 two-way radios, walkie-talkies essentially. And the Los Angeles basin was one of the most crowded RF spectrum places on the planet. We needed hundreds of radio channels. There weren't 10 in 1983. I mean, everything was spoken for. And so Motorola came in and introduced, and again, this was analog, digital would be later, but they put in what were called trunked radio systems that would then
Mhm.
would take a pool of frequencies, and then when you pushed the button, you'd hear a little bleep. And what that bleep meant was that the radio system was going to pick an idle channel, and then open up the speakers on all of the other people in your group, your
Oh, interesting.
sport or whatever it was, or your,
Right.
if it was security, your, venue, and you would say, yeah, over Roger, and then you let your finger off, the channel frees up and can be used by the next person who pushes their button. And so that was, instead of having dedicated frequencies for each radio, as had been normally done, you could start to reuse the spectrum. That was also used in the cellular system, and that's how cellular reuses the channels over and over and over again by just reusing them in a cell that's a few miles away, and so you could be on the same channel and not be stepping on each other.
So was the
So
public aware of all of these things that the committee was using? Was there really a showcase to the people that the sponsors really wanted to show it off to? Was there much information transferred to the general public or the press about this?
no, no, but no, but that didn't matter to AT&T and Motorola and IBM and well, it did, but the people that they wanted to see this technology saw the technology. Now, I was involved. I had two sponsors that I was primarily responsible. One was Ernst and Winnie, and they were one of the big 8 accounting firms back in the day. They were the official manager and operator of the results system. And then I also was the liaison for Xerox and was their day-to-day contact. And so those 2 companies were bringing in their clients. And of course, Xerox is, they have people that they want to show the latest and greatest to. And so the hospitality and the ability for these companies to showcase their products at the Olympics to their customers was paramount. When the games were over, I received a generous job offer from both Xerox and Ernst. Went to work for Ernst, was there for a decade, and almost immediately I got a call back to headquarters, and Ray Groves, who was the chairman of Ernst and Winnie, we later merged with Arthur Young, so it's Ernst and Young today. But Ray Groves said, "I'd really like to employ some of that technology that I saw when we were out in Los Angeles." He says, "I run a professional services organization. And if our people are in the office, they're not making me money. They need to be out at the client. If they're in the office, they're on the beach. If they're out at a client." And so we had all of these distributed workforce scattered all over the place at client locations. And the concept of voicemail and email and cell phones and portable computers, and I was transferred to the headquarters in Cleveland and proceeded to literally install millions of dollars worth of this new technology. And we were able to cost justify every penny of it based on the savings and the efficiencies that are generated just inherently in this. They started, Ernst started equipping their audit and tax professionals with the old compact 32-pound arm stretcher luggable computers, and they would take them out to client sites, and much more efficient. And as I said, after I spent about 5 years working with the corporate operation there at Ernst, I then spent the rest of my career there pushing this new technology out to the rest of corporate America.
So I guess you're really a testament to show that these sponsors had a real ROI on their initial investment in the Olympic multifold.
Absolutely. I mean, the productivity gains that you could read about in a brochure were were manifest in the Olympics, and the fact that we were able to get done and pull off the games on really a shoestring, and we wound up making money, but we couldn't have begun to accomplish sort of the miracle that the Washington Post describes without these technologies, and not just the ones I've mentioned. I mean, we were using things like innovative things on the badges. We were using barcode scanners, which were, again, at the time, somewhat innovative. They weren't being widely used, and so we were using barcode scanners at security checkpoints. RFID would follow, but not for decades.
Well, so an interesting concept dawned on me a few weeks ago. And that is, we've got hackers galore now all over the world, and blockchain technology to protect things. I don't remember security being that, people being that worried about the result system being altered by some kind of fraud, or some kind of, cyber crime. I'm sure it's a much bigger worry today, but was it a worry even back then?
Well, it's a funny story. We did have some hacking, actually. Wasn't widely reported, but I can tell you today, even though the systems, and one of the reasons that there was a lot less hacking was that these systems were essentially closed systems. The telephone system, AT&T, was the network for the world up until the point where the actual internet started to make its appearance, and people started to use dial-up connections. But our systems were essentially self-contained, air-gapped, not connected to anything, because there was nothing to connect to in those days. Right. The biggest online systems of the day were Apollo and Sabre, which were the two big online airline reservation systems, which had thousands of terminals all over the world. But again, those were on dedicated, hardwired circuits from the travel agent back to the airline, and so very secure at those heads. But I'll tell you a couple of the hacking incidents. In order to populate the EMS system with users, I think they spun off a tape from the registration system and from the accreditation system, and they dumped all the names in, and everybody who got a badge got a user ID and a login for the email system, and it was password one or something easy. Well, we figured out, it was actually quite a number of days into the games, but somebody figured out that Ronald Reagan had an email account.
That's right.
In the EMS system.
He was at opening ceremonies.
Well, yeah, and I think they probably printed him a badge,
right.
Here it is. He did, and they didn't wear them, but so he was Olympic family, so he was in the system. So we figured out that Ronald Reagan had a mailbox, so we're right into the mailbox, password one, and we started sending each other congratulation letters from Ronald Reagan. And I actually have a number, and I did a job reference, and where Ronald Reagan was sending me a job, and he also had an email voicemail box, and so we lots of people had fun. It was all white hat hacking, but into Ronald Reagan's mailbox, and we'd record messages like, "Bill, Nancy and I want to say what a great job you've done at the 1984 Olympics." So, and then we'd send it and record it.
But that wasn't your first involvement with the president. You were involved with Mr. Carter too, right?
Serendipitously, I went to USC, which was one of the swimming and diving, and one of the villages. So I was at SC in my senior year. I was at their public administration campus in Washington, D.C., and we had internships during the day and classes at night. And I was fortunate, I had an internship at the Carter White House in the press office. And on October 20th, 1978, while I was working in the press office, LA Mayor Tom Bradley and Lord Killian, and gosh, who was the I don't remember who the other gentleman was who was he was the head of he was president of the USOC, and they came into the Roosevelt Room at the White House and they signed the uh, final contract for awarding the games to Los Angeles. And our group put together the press release, and I've got it in the garage in a box, in the buried in the garage. So yeah, that was one of my that was a very early contact with the LA Games.
And it was all destined for greatness.
There you go. Yeah.
So what's your favorite story from the games?
Oh boy, lots and lots of stories. I have a Peter Uberoth story. So and again, uh, the games had been over for a couple of weeks, and there was a staff management party down in San Clemente at the Nixon Western White House, La Casa Pacifica, and it had just been sold to the gentleman who owned Rogers Gardens.
Yes.
And they were
Which is a
going
big
through
nursery.
and huge
Big fancy
operation.
nursery.
Yeah, and he's a major Orange County philanthropist, and so they were going through and literally completely renovating the property. All the landscaping was being taken out and then would be put back in. And so the owner was very generous to a number of charities and allowed the property to be used for benefits and receptions and things like that. So we had a going away party there. So we're standing in kind of a receiving line with people getting ready to, go up and say goodbye to Peter and get their picture taken. And one of the people in line went up to him and said, "So boss, what are we going to do for an encore?" And he looked at this person and said, "We're not." He said, "You've climbed the highest mountain. You're never going to do anything like this again in your life." Dead serious. And the person looked at him and said, "Humor me, I'm young." He's only like 25. But turns out he was right.
Yeah.
He was right. I mean, I've had an amazing career, just fascinating, the people and everything. Nothing touches the experience of those 2 years I spent at the LAOC. I mean, I was at the White House 5 years before that. That doesn't touch the experience that we had in Los Angeles.
Let's talk a little bit about the game, the 84 games in general, and talk a little bit about why we have turquoise on and why you have decorations in the back, because they're all these funky colors.
Yes, I actually have 12 and a half foot tall street banners from Wilshire Boulevard. I didn't go and cut them down myself, but those are actual Olympic banners. And then the security item behind it, that was for one of the technology departments. That was the look of the games. And the original design was assumed it was all going to be red, white, and blue, very United States. And again, going way back, they said, no, let's do something different. And the whole design of the games was built around, and it evolved over a period of time. It started with the Star in Motion logo that was produced again early on, but it was very lots of pastels, lots of bright colors, and these elements were put into place using design things that were very inexpensive to create. And for example, the banners, street banners were not a thing prior to 1984. They're everywhere now. You go to the Metropolitan Museum and they got banners on the streets and all in the neighborhood, but wasn't a thing in those days. And so the banner, what they wanted to do was sort of light up Los Angeles and do it in such a way that was very, very eye-catching, very unique. And it was called Festive Federalism. That was the name, and we called it Festering Federalism, behind the scenes. but it was, and they used elements like sonotubes, which are the forms that are used when they're pouring concrete columns on freeways. Those were everywhere. They would take something like a boring pop-up tent, temporary tent at a venue and decorate it in all these different colors. And so if you look back at pictures of the games, it just pops and is unforgettable. And again, works well.
Well, I always thought of it as a way to bring it all together, because I mean, we had 24 different venues for these various events, and they were all built at different eras, so that nothing looked alike. And so once they were
Correct.
wrapped in these colors, there was a sense of consistency that you were in fact at the games, and you just weren't at a boxing match at the sports arena or just at a basketball game at the Fabulous Forum, but you got this sense of family and festivities that I think it really created. And you had everybody in uniforms, whether they were the coat and ties or whether they were the volunteer uniforms. There was that sense of consistency throughout. And I think, it was special in Los Angeles. And I don't know if prior Olympics had ever quite gone to that level of decoration, for lack of a better word.
No, and again, we were able to do it with not a lot of money. I mean, it was lots of material and stretched stretched vinyl. They took. We had a construction department that was sort of down under where our offices were on the second floor out at the Marina Center. We had the Marina Center. They tested a lot of this. We outgrew our 3-story office building on the Westwood campus of UCLA, and moved into, literally, it was an abandoned helicopter factory owned by Hughes Aircraft, and it was something like 100,000 square feet under one roof. And what they did was they piled us all in. There were no cubicles. It was just desks and 100,000 square foot open bin or pit, and literally they hung with all the colors and all the graphics, and they tested a lot of it out there. And there would just be a banner over a group of desks, and it would say security, and then it would say transportation, and then another. And so if you wanted to have a meeting with someone, you would just sort of you'd prairie dog up, look around, and if the person you needed to talk to was there, you'd make a beeline and grab them. And it was again very, very but all done with the colors. No advertising at the games, of course, is permitted, and so lots and lots of free space for the graphics, which were used again really, really well. They had again, they used scaffolding at some of the venues where you would come in, and there would be this 15-story tall structure with stars and colors and lights and the rest of it. It's really, really, so really amazing.
That's an interesting point. That you're right. There is no advertising at the Olympics,
No.
And generally it's just the sponsors, and it's a little subtle pin or what have you. But it's not draped all over. Like. In fact, it's nothing like the car racing community or any of the other pro sports where everything is slapped around. So what did they do with some of the venues? Did some of the venues actually have sponsorship in those days? Like we have the United Airlines Coliseum now, and the Rose Bowl sponsored by such and such. We didn't even have that. So
we really didn't. And again, we if you read the Washington Post article, and it's worth a look, because it does talk about a lot of some of the foundational management decisions, because the LAOC was denied almost all sources of traditional funding. Usually there's a coin program that got blocked. Usually there's a lottery. No lottery in Los Angeles. No lottery in California in 1984. Stamp programs, that was all blocked. Usually the government pays tremendous amounts of funds. It was Proposition N, I think, that California taxpayers said no money at all. And so it really came from TV rights, this very, very exclusive sponsorship arrangements that they came up with these just platinum companies. ticket sales. We sold a lot of tickets, and again, a variety of sources that were, well, the torch relay. That was that we'd never. Torch relays were traditional, but we did the torch relay where they sold a kilometer. You could run a kilometer on the torch relay for $3,000, which I don't know on the inflation calculator. That's a big number.
Yeah.
Going back 40 years. But you got to keep the torch. You got to keep your torch, and it was an Easton aluminum, really cool torch. I've seen a number of them in museums, but they sold those kilometers and made a great deal of money. It was very controversial. The Greek government wasn't the least bit happy about the fact that we monetized the torch, monetized the flame, but yeah, very little advertising. Even the sports equipment vendors had to be careful. You could have you could have a Wilson mitt, but boy, you couldn't have it in fluorescent green that show up on the cameras. It was just the standard equipment.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Do you have some closing thoughts?
Gosh, Chris, I'll tell you, it was a pleasure, and just the chance to share some of the stories. I know that there's a team hard at work on 2028. I've gone on their website, and lots of kids our age that were our age 40 years ago, running through walls, getting ready to do it again here for the third time in Los Angeles here in a few short years. So maybe I'll go and be a greeter at one of the venues or something.
I think you can do a lot more than be a greeter. I promise you.
Christopher, again, thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. You have a great day.
Do the same.
And